Like many other kids in the early 2000s, I grew up watching Sonic X. Now, being an American, I grew up watching the English dub and not the original Japanese version of Sonic X. As a kid, I just loved seeing Sonic and his friends on screen, but I recently tried to watch the show again, and I have to say, the American dub has done the original a great disservice due to a laughable amount of silly censorship choices. And since we're talking about censorship, we need to distinguish between censorship and localization. In media terms, censorship is the act of suppressing or removing scenes from a movie that may be deemed inappropriate for audiences, while localization is changing the media so that it can be understood and enjoyed within different cultural contexts. To give an example for both of these that isn't Sonic related, I'm going to use Bluey as an example because they have some pretty silly censorship, much like Sonic X. Here's an example of censorship. In this scene, there was a joke that could be deemed suggestive in the original Australian dub, so the American dub changed it.
It's sweet chili sauce. Care for a lick?
Tempting.
Sweet chili sauce. Do you want a bit?
Tempting.
This is the perfect example of censorship since they are suppressing the original joke and changing it completely. Now, here's a scene where localization was used. In the Australian dub, they used the term flog, but in the American dub, they used beat.
We're gonna flog ya! We're gonna beat ya!
In localization, the meaning remains the same, but wording may be tweaked due to cultural context. For instance, where I'm from in America, I had no idea what flog even meant the first time I watched the scene, and I'm sure kids watching wouldn't understand it either. I want to establish this now because I will not be talking about localization changes in Sonic X. I'll just be talking specifically about American censorship. With that being said, let's hop into the censorship of violence in Sonic X. One of the most notable censorship changes in Sonic X is that a lot of quote-unquote violence is taken out. And I say quote-unquote because a lot of what they censored isn't really that violent, and you'll probably see it in any normal American kids show. For instance, in one episode, Amy is possessed by King Boom Boo and plans to sacrifice her friends to him. Sounds scary, right? I have a few friends who said this scene freaked them out as a kid. But what is wild to me is that none of this original scene was censored and the story remained exactly the same. They keep in Amy chasing Chris with her hammer and her scary face. The only thing they change is that in the original, Sonic rushes over to Amy and gives her a smack on the back of the head that releases Boo's spirit. However, in the American dub, this moment was removed completely and King Boo's spirit just leaves when Sonic rushes over.
Amy, are you okay?
This happens way more in Sonic X than just this instance. One major critique is that in the original Japanese dub, there were some fights where characters would get scratched and bleed or have some blood drip from their head, but in the American dub, a lot of it was censored. One specific scene is when Cream fights Emerald. In the Japanese dub, he cries oil, but in the English dub, they just made him cry like a normal tear. He's a robot, so it makes sense he would cry oil. Why this was censored, I don't know. But it didn't just stop at blood. In the English dub, a specific fight scene was removed, but not any other ones. The scene in question is during the Sonic Adventure 2 arc where Chris and Shadow have a little bit of an altercation where Chris is trying to talk him down from destroying the world, and Shadow in the original actually punches him twice.
復讐のために生きて復讐が終わるとき一緒に死ぬなんてそんなの間違ってる。
黙れ!
However, when this was taken over to America, both of the punches were taken out.
Hands off.
No, Chris! Can't you see it's not fair?
Don't talk to me about fair! Not after what happened here!
I'm not sure why this specific scene with Chris was the only fight that was censored to my knowledge. I do know this happened when Amy had Chris in a headlock and was going to hit him with a hammer. That scene was censored in the American dub as well. It just seems odd to me because fights between characters like Sonic and Shadow or Shadow and Tails are not censored at all to my knowledge. But all of a sudden, when a human gets thrown into the mix, America censored it for some reason. Several instances of this can also be seen in the ARC storyline from Sonic Adventure 2 when it was taken to Sonic X. And it's pretty frequent in this arc. When talking about Dr. Gerald Robotnik's fate in Sonic Adventure 2, the actual video game, the English dub stayed true to the original and sealed his fate as death by firing squad. Nothing was shown, it was just a gunshot heard off screen. However, just 2 years later in Sonic X, this was censored in the English dub. My favorite part about this is they actually forgot to censor the gunshot sound, so he just keeps talking over the gunshot.
You'll see. You'll see. You'll see.
残すべきメッセージはあるか？ありません。構え！
I'm not sure why they felt the need to censor this because it was just in the video game 2 years prior. But the same exact thing happens in the English dub when we get the iconic scene with Maria and Shadow. In the original Sonic Adventure 2 game, we get confirmation that Maria died on the Ark by being shot to death. But in the English version of Sonic X, it was completely censored out.
She was so young.
In the English dub, they simply say she was taken away and we are to assume she was never seen again and eventually died. You could argue that this is too violent for young audiences, but it's common in Sonic X to see cops and soldiers firing their guns. And the biggest gripe here is that it takes away from Shadow's storyline. If there was even a chance Maria was still alive, Shadow's storyline would not exist at all. I can go on and on about multiple examples of violent things being removed from the series, like gunshots being changed to laser sounds, the police shooting at Chaos was completely taken out, the removal of gun text from a ton of military vehicles. Overall, I don't think any of the examples here are really warranted. And the reason I say that is because every single scene that they censor, there's at least 5 other scenes behind it that are basically the same and have not been censored. But now let's step away from violence and move into the censorship of suggestive material. Suggestive material, for Sonic X censorship purposes at least, refers to anything flirtatious, inherently sexual, or any cursing. And yes, there is all of that in the Japanese dub, but when it was dubbed over in English, most of that was censored or taken out completely. Starting off on the lighter end, there is a scene in the Japanese dub where Sonic actually curses, but it was not left in the English dub.
Cream, hang on!
Shit! 行くぞ!
You could argue that this is localization, you could argue it's censorship, I'm just kind of including it because I think it's funny. But the biggest source of censorship as far as suggestive material goes is definitely Rouge, starting with her first appearance. This scene is pretty iconic, I've seen it online a few times. Rouge makes a pretty raunchy sex joke in the Japanese dub.
ハードなプレイがお好みなの?
As you can imagine, this joke was completely removed from the English dub and replaced with a more age-appropriate joke.
You know, you're pretty tough for an old lady.
There's even a few points in the English dub where her cleavage is completely censored, although it only happens a few times. But a lot of Rouge's scenes just got cut completely from the English dub. In one scene that was cut, she sips alcohol while bathing in the bathtub while Boken, watches her or, talks to her.
ジュースよ。うるさいな。果物のジュースなら何でもいいじゃんか。だ。作り直してくるじゃん。ああ、そうそう。
Now, originally I understood why they censored this, but a few episodes prior, Rouge was also in a bathtub, and they didn't censor it. It made it into the English dub. My guess is that since the first one contained another person in the bathroom with her, and because alcohol was shown, maybe that's why it was censored. And speaking of alcohol, basically all of it was censored in the English dub. The censorship of alcohol was really handled 2 ways. 1, it was changed to soda or juice, and 2, it was removed completely. Like here we can see this beer ad gets changed to cola. This specific sign actually appears a few times in the series. You can find a lot of alcohol censorship in Sonic X Episode 14, That's What Friends Are For. In the background of this scene, you can see people holding wine glasses with orange liquid. But in the original, it was red wine. This same episode has a shot of reporters drinking, and that was also removed from the English dub. And this white wine here was, again, censored to orange juice in the English dub. In another scene, there are some reporters that are upset, and the president's secretary offers to pour them a drink, but in the English dub, this was changed to some salami?
Now, fellas, I assure you Sonic is on the way. Just be patient. How about a little salami?
It's an odd choice, but I guess it is one way to get around the censorship. Moving away from alcohol and back into suggestive material, we have a scene with cream that was removed from the English dub. Here in episode 10, Sonic and his friends are playing baseball against Dr. Eggman to win a Chaos Emerald. When it is Cream's turn to bat in the English dub, she says, "Please don't throw the ball too hard," to the robot, which gets him flustered and he drops the ball.
Oh, Mr. Pitcher, could you maybe not throw the ball too hard? I've never played before.
Pretty innocent, nothing too weird. Robot probably just thinks she's a cute kid, right? But in the Japanese dub, she confesses her love and gets him really, really flustered.
Bug, ahora sí de favor.
I think the scene was removed just due to it being pretty uncomfortable to watch. Because although I didn't show it, an adult instructed her to do this off screen. An adult instructing a 5-year-old rabbit to sweet talk a robot is kind of weird, so I guess I get why they censored it in the English dub. Now, this next scene I'm going to talk about, I completely understand why it was removed, but I also think it's hilarious. It involves Knuckles, who's usually pretty tough as nails. He follows Deco and Boko into a building, not realizing it's a brothel, and I'll just let the scene play out. As if this scene wasn't already bad enough, Deco and Boko end up dancing with some of the ladies and later end up covered in lipstick marks, and obviously all of this was removed. The same thing kind of happens here where Sonic runs into some geishas and I believe they just compliment him, but he does end up blushing and that was too much and was cut from the English dub. However, they also could have been removed or censored because they were insignificant, which brings us to our next point. Originally, I wasn't going to include the removal of insignificant scenes, but because it is censorship, I decided to keep it. Because in the end, they did suppress the original content. It was completely removed from the English dub. This scene is a really great scene, and I honestly wish they would have kept it in the English dub, but for some reason they didn't, and I'm really not sure why. It's a really pivotal scene in Chris's backstory where he talks about growing up alone because his parents were never around. They were always off doing something important. I feel like this scene really provides a lot of insight to his character and explains why he may act the way he does. My guess is maybe this would be seen as child neglect in some way, and so they decided to remove it. That, or maybe they just figured it would be too sad for younger audiences to view. I'm really not sure. And while myself and others have theories for why these insignificant scenes were removed, some others, like these scenes, we have no idea why they were removed. In this scene, Chris and Amy are just having a conversation at a bakery or cafe, and for some reason this was completely cut from the English dub. You could argue it was cut to save time, but many episodes in Sonic X have no cuts and run the full amount of the original time. Another theory is they thought maybe it wouldn't grab the kids' attention. This scene from the original dub is one of my favorites just because I think it's cute, but it was cut from the English version. After this, Amy just reprimands Knuckles and tells him to stop and that it's not funny. Originally, I thought, well, some shows go and censor scenes that may be bullying or mean because they don't want kids to imitate those actions. But arguing and bickering is shown constantly in Sonic X, and why this was censored specifically, I do not know. Another scene that some people view as insignificant is this scene of Eggman eating these beef noodles. However, there are some theories that the English dub just wanted to censor any Japanese influences. And you may think that's silly, but it brings me directly into my next point, which is the censorship of the original Japanese text. Now, normally this is pretty simple stuff, like taking the text off of a vending machine that, guess what, the text was originally there. Another common case of text censorship is signs that originally had characters in Japanese, when moved to English now are completely blank. It's also common for Japanese characters to just be completely covered by something else. However, what I find funny is that in the English dub, they will basically censor things that are already in English. For instance, in this scene, everything written is just squiggles and dots except for shadow. However, when we look at the original Japanese version, it is completely in English. My guess is it was censored because it says things like, "oh hell" and "Christ's sake," which is usually not allowed in English broadcasting. Another iconic instance of this is when the Chaotix land on Earth with their detective office. There's actually a sign above their door that reads Detective Office. This sign was removed completely when it came over to the English dub, even though the sign was written in English. But besides this, it's also wildly inconsistent. There's an episode where Knuckles visits a local Chinatown, and all of the text here is intact. None of it is removed, in fact. Every instance of the language is kept intact, and you could argue that it's the setting and therefore the original language needs to be there. But just a few episodes later, Sonic and his friends are in a place that mimics Little Tokyo, a very similar setting, and the text at the bus stop, which was originally in Japanese, was removed when it came over to the English dub. Some changes are extremely subtle, and you most likely wouldn't notice them, but others not so much. One infamous example is that Sonic and Chris are writing their plan on these little handheld signs, and in the English, these were just completely left blank for some reason. Some theorize that the American dub was given blanks, and that Japan just never told them what was on the signs, and therefore the English dub couldn't translate it, but I find this hard to believe considering our Chinatown example. I don't know that the English dub really was ever given any blanks. A lot of people, myself included, theorize on why all of this was censored, and there's really no good answer. My thought is, if you're gonna censor something, at least censor every instance of it. This is just another example of the wild inconsistencies they have. I hate censorship, but if you're gonna do it, at least do it right and consistently. There are way more examples than what I've brought up here, but I want to get into my next and final point. And this is another point you won't even realize if you watch the American dub, but a lot of the original music was censored. If you grew up watching Sonic X like me, then you obviously know this iconic opening. But the original Japanese actually sounded like this. And while it is common for original openings to get the boot when it's moved to a different country, the music was replaced in almost every single scene, even if it was just instrumental. In the opening scene of Sonic X in English, the music sounds like this.
Tails, the plane's on fire! What are we gonna do?
But in the original Japanese, this is the music you actually would have heard. This probably won't bother most English audiences because they've never heard the original Japanese soundtrack. In one specific instance, there was quite a bit of gripe about the soundtrack change. At the end of the Adventure 2 arc, Sonic and Shadow turn into Super Sonic and Super Shadow, and if you've played the video game, you know the iconic song Live and Learn plays. And in the Japanese dub, it did originally play here. But in the English dub, it was replaced with something like this.
Give it our best shot.
All right, we can go in at full speed and finish it off.
Once again, the English dub plays into this kind of orchestral soundtrack. Live and Learn is originally in English, so I'm not sure why they censored it here. I know several people online have been perpetually angry that this was removed. But I think I will end the video here so I don't have to battle any more copyright strikes than I'll already have to. Censorship is so subjective. Everybody has different opinions on what should and should not be censored, and Sonic X is no different. Youth broadcasting standards probably force them to censor out some things that we don't understand and constantly theorize about. Unfortunately, because of this, many people revere the English dub of Sonic X as one of the worst dubs, as it does take away a lot from the characters and plot. This leaves shallow characters and gaping plot holes. If you want a way more in-depth video on Sonic X censorship, I highly recommend Hensama series because he goes over literally every little single change. But the show has been out and finished for over 15 years now, so I guess there's nothing we can do but complain and laugh. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I will see you all next time.